Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Welcome to the fifth and most action-packed week here at the temporary capital of the Wyoming Legislature. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. Thank you very much for joining us. We begin tonight's discussion with a supplemental budget clash that has erupted between the Senate and the House, complete with suspension of rules in the Senate and new budget bills being brought forward. Senate President Drew Perkins and House Speaker Steve Harshman will lead us off and bring us up to date relative to the state's supplemental budgeting process. Then we'll visit with the two chairmen of the Transportation, Highway, and Military Affairs Committee. That's Representative John Eklund and Senator Michael von Flatern for an update on air service and also a potential big-ticket expense that's facing the Wyoming Department of Transportation. Senator Hank Coe is this week's Capital Outlook profile. We visited the longtime senator at his home before the session in Cody, and we'll bring that to you as well. Then we'll meet two freshman legislators, Representative Sara Burlingame and Representative Andi Clifford, both Democrats and both women, a rarity here in the legislature in Cheyenne. We'll wrap up week 5 with two of the more conservative members of the Wyoming legislature, Senator Bull Biteman and Representative Chuck Gray. All of that is on Capital Outlook this week, starting now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
And we begin week 5 here of Capital Outlook in Cheyenne with a discussion primarily on budgets with the leadership of the Wyoming legislature, Senate President Drew Perkins and House Speaker Steve Harshman. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Yeah, good morning, thanks.
To say that Wednesday, February 6th was a normal day in the legislature might be somewhat of an understatement. Mr. President, I want to start with you. The rules were suspended in the Senate. New budget bills were brought forward. It puts into question, I think, the rest of the process for the supplemental budget. Bring us up to date.
Well, I think people are just reading way too much into that. What you had is when in the budget bill, after it came out, the bodies kind of went in different directions. And ultimately, there's about 4 things, regardless of whether we come to agreement on anything else, there's about 4 things we all know need to be done. And so these are just held in reserve in case we couldn't come to an agreement. We've got some ways to get some things done that have to be done. But I think we're getting, we're having some discussions between the bodies, and I really think we're going to be able to bring the budget in just like we do every year. I think it's going to be fine. So
what you're predicting is that the supplemental budget will go through the conference process and end up running through. Is that how you see it, Mr. Speaker? Do you see this as a power move by the Senate to maybe limit your opportunity?
No, I think it's more about a communication move, I think. And I think really, I don't even really know. I haven't read the paper this morning, No, the process is going to work. I mean, the thing about the budget bill, it's like any bill, the entire bodies get a weigh in on it. So some of the amendments on the House budget bill, I mean, we just overran the Appropriations Committee and leadership. I mean, some of these we were up saying, arguing against these amendments, but the body rules, as always. And so and that's part of the process. Everybody's duly elected. You get to come down here and weigh in on legislation. Senate members, same thing. Now we have different versions. We'll come together in a conference committee and sort it out. And we're less than 1% of the budget apart. I mean, it's not like it's some massive gaping divide. It's not the Grand Canyon. It's a little muddy creek out there. We'll fix that.
Numbers of division have been published to be about 70 million, Mr. President. Is that the number that you see as far as differences between the House and Senate?
There's lots of different ways you can add up those numbers. But I think the actual number, if you go to the budget bill, I think the actual number's about 39 plus 12, about 50 maybe.
Yeah.
And some of those aren't really differences because there's bills that actually have some of those appropriations in those. So as those bills go through, and even in the budget bill, some of those appropriations go away if certain bills pass or certain bills fail. So Yeah, it's not even when you get it, it's even, I think it's even less. And we'll come to some agreement on this stuff.
Some of our viewers aren't familiar with the budget process, and I think it might be helpful to them to understand that the Joint Appropriations Committee has been working this supplemental budget for a long time. They go through markup, they change it, then the same budget bill comes to the House and to the Senate, and then your bodies each get a chance to amend. That's where the differences that we see today come in. Is that essentially, do you want to add to that process, and then a conference committee is appointed, theoretically, and everything is hammered out in the end here?
Correct. I mean, I think you said it well. I think the budget bill is the only one in our rules that we actually have mirror bills. The rest of the bills are either House bills or Senate files, and so both bodies are working this at the same time. It's now being written, the differences, and they'll get together with basically work through those differences. And as the president said, geez, I think 20 million of that number is really in the Department of Revenue on, excise tax or implementing this national retail fairness. And so how that gets worked out, that's just, and there's multiple ways to work that. And that's most of the difference, frankly.
I want to talk about House Bill 220, the National Retail Fairness Act. It's over in the Senate side of the street now. But a couple groups now have come out, the Wyoming Retail Association and the Wyoming Restaurant and Lodging Association, against the bill. They're renaming the bill as a corporate income tax for Wyoming. Is this bill a corporate income tax, and is this bill still a good idea? We discussed it a couple weeks ago. Do you see it moving forward, Mr. President?
Well, yes, I do. I think it'll go into the Senate, and we'll have a good debate and discussion about it. People put all kinds of names on all kinds of things. At the end of the day, as you look at this tax, Wyoming people are already paying this number. The question is, where's the benefit going to go? Is it going to go to another state if the income is taxed in that state, they'll get a credit for any taxes paid in Wyoming, or is it going to be paid to their corporate shareholders, or are going to be in Wyoming? Wyoming's one of, as I understand it, Wyoming's one of 2 states who don't have some form of this, South Dakota and Wyoming. And so, their pricing takes this into consideration, and it's not going to affect local small businesses. It's mostly going to affect larger corporations that have a national presence.
Some of their pushback on the bill is that roughly half of the states don't have that throwback rule. And essentially then the tax burden on the corporations would be greater for them than the states that do have the throwback rule. Is that what you see?
Well, I respectfully disagree. I think, first of all, I think Wyoming's the only state in the United States who have a constitutional provision that gives a full credit for any other taxes paid. So you see this 7% rate, which is the national average. The effective rate's going to be much less than that, because they're going to be able to have credits for any other taxes paid in Wyoming, property taxes, et cetera. But really, this is about, and then the bill is clearly written, it's about C corporations with 100 shareholders or more. And the president's a tax attorney, he knows all this too as well. That's a clear demarcation in the federal law, right? So this is not going to affect your local retail guys in your town or any locally owned. This is clearly a clear line in federal statute where we have 100 shareholders or more.
We have about 3 weeks left or so. If I were to ask you, what are your priorities now for the rest of the session, budget bills aside, what would you tell me, Mr. President?
I think that if you look at, there's some things that really move Wyoming forward. There's some incentive bills that I think can help spur production. There's a Chancery Court, which I think will help spur economic development. There's a great bill about, there's a great bill out there. There's going to be some bills about education and expanding education across the state, post-secondary education. There's a lot of stuff that's moving forward that's very important, I think will really move Wyoming well into the future. There's been some really substantive issues that have come from House bills and Senate files, from interim work, from individual legislators. And I think that there's going to be some really memorable legislation that comes out of this session.
Mr. Speaker, do you have things that are at the top of your priority list now here?
Yeah, I think the president hit the highlights on that. I think we're going to go a long way to solving our education funding issues. We've been working and talking about ideas for for months, really, and I think we're going to make some more progress on that front. I think, as the president said, I think there's some big dreams out there too, and some big ideas from our coal-fired power plants that the Senate has worked hard on, to these education opportunities that a lot of members, those bills are all out there. I just think there's a lot of big ideas, and then I think also there's some really important, Wyoming's really unique. When we build capital construction things, we pay cash. I think we're probably the only state. I mean, we save money and then for projects, and so there's a lot of those. And I think in the past, people, Wyoming, most of the government's along the old UP line, right, across the southern part of the state. But you see these capital construction projects for the Veterans Greenhouse and the Veterans Home rebuild in Buffalo and all these things. So there's a lot of things out there, from the state hospital to the prison to the Soldiers and Sailors Home, that are in capital construction will be important as well, because those are a lot of people working, and that's really another way for our state to save money and invest, because you're never going to build it any cheaper than you are this year, right? And those things will last for real decades. And
we'll look forward to visiting with you both next week.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on Capital Outlook this morning.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And we are now pleased to be joined by the two chairmen of the Transportation, Highway, and Military Affairs Committees here in the Wyoming Legislature, Representative John Eklund and Senator Michael von Flatern. Before we get into the work of the committee, Senator von Flatern will bring us up to date on the status of bids received and current negotiations of the Commercial Air Service Capacity Agreement. That's an effort by the Wyoming Legislature, an initiative to preserve air service in Rock Springs, Riverton, and Sheridan. To both of you, welcome to Capital Outlook.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Before we get into work with your committees, and there's lots to talk about, I want to talk with you first, Senator, about the status of the Commercial Air Service Capacity Agreement.
The criteria was that you had a 30 to 50 seat jet airplane that had a code share. In other words, if I checked my luggage in Sheridan, Wyoming, it would show up in Melbourne, Australia, if I showed up in Melbourne, if that's where I was headed. Well, hopefully your luggage doesn't go there and you go to Melbourne, sure, Florida. But so that was basically the two criteria. They had a 30 to 50 seat jet, and you had a code share with some other airline.
And what airports are involved in this process?
Rock Springs, Riverton, Sheridan, and a third flight. We're trying to negotiate a third flight to Gillette. So there'd be 3 flights, 5 days a week, and 2 flights, hopefully 2 to 1 flight on Saturday and Sunday. We allocated the $15 million in Senate File 40 last year. We needed to authorize the spending. We appropriated it last year. We needed to authorize the spending once they saw the criteria as to what we were going to do with the money. And so we're hoping that it will be authorized this year. And then in about mid-March, we'll start negotiating. We did put some sideboards on there that said $6 million. In no one year could they spend more than $6 million. And should there not be a capacity purchase agreement come June 30th, that we will take some of the money out of that $15 million and we'll use it to keep the minimum revenue guarantees, the way we do it today, going, the airlines going to Riverton, Rock Springs, and Sheridan. So right now we only had 2 responses, which is a little disappointing. We already knew that 2 would not qualify, so we had 5 people that we thought could qualify, including United Airlines, which is the largest carrier of the group. And they sent a nice letter back saying we didn't respond because we're working through some others. And 2 that did respond, I don't know that I can give the names, contractual issues, but I think they're public. I think the public knows of these 2 airlines. They do serve Wyoming today. And we need that authorization before we can start contract negotiations with those.
Do you expect that you'll come to an agreement by late April or May kind of deadline that you've imposed?
We're thinking probably first or second week of May, we hopefully have some agreement. So by June 30th, we already have somebody in place and we will not have to continue the minimum revenue guarantees, although we have 6 months, we think we have 6 months covered keeping air service while these people get it posted on their website, whoever that might be, get the crews in place, get the airplanes situated, and start service. So it might be August, September, October before they actually start service, but we should have enough money to continue with the carriers that are doing the minimum revenue guarantee.
Just real quickly, in the industry, pilot shortage still the major issue?
That is a huge issue. We thought it was equipment and pilot shortage. And equipment, apparently, at least one of the carriers has said, no, we've got a agreement with the FAA. We can extend the life of the planes we're flying. Not only that, we're buying some new airplanes. So we have some airplanes that are available, but the pilot shortage, you probably can't get around for the next 5 or 10 years.
Interesting to follow its progress, and thank you very much for the update. Representative Eklund, let me turn to you with some of the work that the committee has done, especially in the interim, and something that we were talking about off camera, House Bill 83, which is the Revenue Information System, a bill that didn't come out of committee after some interim work, that is going to be tremendously expensive. First of all, give us a background on what this system is. It's a big computer, an old mainframe computer that exists at WYDOT. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was moved from the Department of Revenue to WYDOT because they had a mainframe large enough to hold the RIS system. It keeps track of our people in Wyoming. It seems like it should be something that's part of the IT department, but it's been the responsibility of the Department of Transportation. Transportation isn't the only one that uses it, of course. It's used by Family Services and others.
Motor Vehicle Services, Port of Entry, Driver Service, lots
of agencies that depend on it. It has to be interconnected with not just those agencies in interstate, but also other states. The present one is in a language called COBOL, or a technology called COBOL, which is archaic. This system is, as described to me, is big, cumbersome, clunky, but sound. So I don't know how you get all of that, but it's harder to work on than a newer system would be, and the language is more complex. The people who work on them are retired and harder to come by. Younger technology people would not have a clue how to fix this.
And I agree with that. COBOL is a language that found itself in the 70s and 80s with IBM System 36 and 38 computers was where you found that in bank reporting systems. And there are not many programmers. So fast forward to today now, a need to do something differently. And again, an estimate over a 10-year period of nearly $70 million was the best case estimate that you heard in the interim to rectify the problem and to move forward.
Yeah, that was what the study came up with. We don't have $70 million or that kind of money laying around. We also have concerns that over a 10-year period of time, if we were to pay for it 6.8 or
6.8 million a year
per year, somewhere in the middle of that before it's even paid for, it would be outdated and we'd need something else. So we have concerns about that. Ideas that are floated, ideas are hard to come by when you don't have enough money, and that's a problem the state has right now. Ideas that have been floated would be to do a consortium of states and try to do some sharing of those costs with other states similar to us, with a lower population, rural type states.
Safe to say that this issue will have interim effort again?
I don't know.
I'm not sure that WYDOT or Wyoming Department of Transportation has put that on their list, but we'll probably hear some more.
Yeah, we'll find out.
It'll be something to watch because I think the expense to the state is something that can't be ignored. And I think, as you say, it's something that needs to be looked at and repaired because of its aged out nature, so to speak, of technology, both hardware and software is my guess. So on to another bill that's gotten a lot of attention in the legislature in a positive way, I think, is HB 32, the Veteran Skilled Nursing Facility. It's out of the House. It's on its way to the Senate. It's gotten great support, a little discussion maybe on whether the facility should ultimately be in Buffalo or Casper or Sheridan. What were your thoughts as it was going to the House, and then, Senator, I'll come to you.
Okay, and that is the big controversy. I think that we've got both the House and the Senate are very supportive of it. We need to get this done for the veterans. That's central and essential. Where it's put has been the the burr under the saddle, so to speak. And I'm not sure. I'm guessing Mike and I both will stand as referees to be neutral on that. So I can't. I know what was said in the study. I know what the issues are, but I will continue to try to keep everyone focused on getting this done, whether it be Buffalo. There's Buffalo, Sheridan, and Casper were the ones on the table. Coming out of the initial interim, the interim, it went to Buffalo.
Yes.
And then came to my committee, and it went to, we amended it to go to Casper. It was not adopted on committee of the whole.
The amendment wasn't.
The amendment wasn't, so it remains at Buffalo. And but the House was very supportive. I think we're going to get it done. The Veterans Commission did the study, and you have to trust that they picked the best 3 sites, and we will. I'm going to be as neutral as I can, make sure we stay focused on.
Wyoming's one of the few, if not the only state that does not have
The
only one, and it's kind
now
of
it's in your
embarrassing.
court, Senator. How are you going to manage this?
So I'm going to blame John. Anything that happens is his fault. It is in Buffalo at the moment. We're going to hear it tonight upon adjournment, which would be Wednesday night upon adjournment, barring the weather. Now, this has been brought to my attention that the weather and the roads may be bad enough that certain people that are coming from those 3 towns can't make it down here to testify, which probably won't upset the committee too much, but
You want to hear them, though.
yeah, I want to hear everybody that's got anything to say about this, but I don't have a dog in this hunt. It's up to those 3 towns to make their best presentation, and it'll be up to our committee, which is only 5 members, to decide how it comes out of that committee. When it goes to the floor, it's a whole different world, as John found out when he did the committee of the whole amendment, and it wasn't even accepted in the House. So,
How will you weigh a recommendation versus testimony you're going to hear? How does that mesh in your mind?
you know, when you look at the practical side of it, you look at employment, you look at other facilities that are available, you look at visiting relatives, can they come in and out? Everything tends to point towards a Casper. I mean, it has the only commercial airport of the 3. Well, Sheridan still has some flights that come in from Denver. But, you know, you want to keep your rural community solid too. And if the state can't help to even placing something in the rural communities, then maybe we should place everything in Casper, let the rural communities, except for a couple ranchers, go away. And so, you know, it's a very tough thing to do, and it is. I'll let the testimony tonight, and I'll let the committee decide. You know, a 3-2 vote is all it takes, but we may be stalemated on most of it.
I think everyone agrees, though, this is something that should happen.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We're 100% support of this.
Sure.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch you both work now in the interim. It's a committee that has a lot of heavy lifting with a wide variety of things under its belt. So thank you both for joining us on Capital Outlook today.
Well,
I appreciate
thank you,
it.
Craig.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you for having us.
On now to our Senate profile. This week, we had an opportunity before the holidays to visit Senator Hank Coe at his home in Cody. That's next. And it's our pleasure, our weekly tradition, to be joined by today Senator Hank Coe from Cody. Senator, welcome to this Capital Outlook profile.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Got to ask you, it hasn't been 10 years, it hasn't been 20 years, it's been 30 years now.
Finishing year 30. My first session was, I got elected in 1988. My first session was 1989.
So what's changed with the way the legislature operates, would you say?
Well, there's a number of things that are different. You know, we all cherish computers now. And boy, my first 4 or 5 years down there, we did everything by telephone. And it would be nothing to go back to your room at night and, you know, have 25, 30 phone messages. So you returned all your phone messages or you weren't a good legislator. And now we do all that by computer. So that's really changed. Still just class quality people serving. It's just, I marvel at the quality of the people that run for that office down there. You've
oftentimes talked about it as you've been campaigning for re-election, like many legislators talk about, and we've talked to others about it on these profiles, about the need for Wyoming to try to remove itself from the boom and bust cycle. And in the last year or so, what have you been thinking about that?
Well, I've been thinking that this is probably the third one I've been through, early 90s and in the early 2000s. And that bumper sticker I told you about when we were visiting earlier, God, give me one more boom and I promise I won't screw it up this time. But I don't think we're going to see boom and bust, like really massive boom and bust like we've had. Clearly coal, we know what the future of coal is. It's not good. Oil and gas, all of a sudden with brand new technology, this country's producing huge amounts of, excess amounts of natural gas. We're almost totally self-sufficient in oil. So I think you're going to see stability in the energy sector, and I don't think you're going to see the booms and the busts. And we just got to get out of this one that we're trying to get over right now. So,
you've been really involved in education in the last decade or so here in the legislature. Why?
Well, it's interesting. I was president of the Senate in 2001 and 2002, and right behind me, as my majority floor leader, was April Brimmer Kuntz, Senator April Brimmer Kuntz from Cheyenne. And she went on to become the first female president of the Senate. We had a wonderful lady named Senator Irene Devon from Laramie that chaired Senate Education. And she decided to retire and travel with her husband. Wonderful people. So April called me into her office one day and she said, "Co, I got a job for you. I want you to chair education." I said, "You got to be out of your mind." She said, "No." And so that was 2003. And realized that I had a real passion for education for kids, and because I care about that stuff a lot, just like probably everybody does. But thought I could make a difference in the overall effects of education, and tore into it, and here I'm still doing it.
You're in a Cody that understands tourism as well as any other community in Wyoming. How is the industry here?
It's wonderful. I mean, we had a great summer. I mean, we've had 2 or 3 great summers. We used to be pretty mineral dependent in this county. Marathon Oil, we have Oregon Basin out here, still a large oil producer, but that belongs to Merit now. But tourism, we've done things to diversify the tourism side. We've gotten ourselves competitive with other destination communities. We have a very active travel council here that promotes this community like crazy. And I've been very involved in the airline service side of that. I formed a committee back in 2004 that said we're going to do something about our air service, and we have. And we have summer service out of Chicago here in the summer. So helps to have Yellowstone 50 miles
sure
away.
Does.
But this is a strong tourism community, and it's great. It's a good, clean industry, and although the locals, we affectionately say, glad to see them come, but glad to see them go. But we aren't quite like Jackson. I mean, Jackson's much, much larger than we are tourism-wise, but it's a huge part of our economy here.
Senator, your family has a long, long history here in Cody, dating back generations. When did the Coes arrive in the area?
Well, my grandfather, William Robertson Coe, first came out here in 1898 elk hunting with an old boy named A.A. Anderson, and loved it out here. And ended up owning the Hoodoo Ranch out here for a number of years, and bought a piece of property up on Carter Mountain up the South Fork Valley out of Cody called Irma Lake Lodge, and he bought a 490-acre place and bought that from Buffalo Bill. 1913, the old Cody cabin's still there. And he just loved Wyoming, and of course he developed the School of American Studies. He was very active in the William Robertson Coe Library at the University, a School of American Studies, did that at a number of other universities, and did a lot of things for this community. So I'm very proud of the Coe side of the family. And my mother's side of the family I'm very proud of. She was a Shaw, and her father, Ernie Shaw, was a state legislator, one of the old town fathers. And my mother was born right here in Cody, Wyoming on Christmas Day, 1917, Peg Shaw. I was born here as well, so I always like to say that Somebody asked me if you've lived in Cody all your life. I said not yet, but I'm getting close. So, yeah, you know, it's a marvelous little community. We do great things with infrastructure here. We've got a wonderful recreation center. We've got a lot of really nice things here, and it's a community that gives back to itself a lot.
Representative Blake wanted to make sure we asked you about the railroad history in your family. He's a railman, as you well know. You also have deep, rich railroad history in your family, too.
I do. My great-grandfather, Henry Huddleston Rogers, who was one of the originals with John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, built the largest railroad in the country ever built with private money called the Virginian Railroad, and it hauled coal from Roanoke to Tidewater. And so my family's always been active in the railroad side of things, and my Uncle Bill, my father's brother, was on the board of the Virginian for a long, long time. That got purchased by Norfolk and Western, but or Norfolk and Southern. So yeah, you know, my background, I grew up on trains, and every opportunity I get, I still try to get on one.
You gonna retire here in Cody?
Oh, I think so. There's no question. I'm pretty much situated here. You can see that I'm pretty situated.
Senator, before you became a legislator, you were active politically here in Cody. You were a volunteer fireman.
Yep.
Became chief of the fire department.
Right.
County commissioner. What motivated you to serve, even when you were younger?
I don't know. My mother was chairman of the board of the Buffalo Bill Center of the West for 23 years. I've been on the board over there since '82, and she was before then, after my father passed away in '66. But always felt like giving back to this community. County commissioner for 8 years, and Cody Fire was, you know, it's a big operation here. It's not.
What was it like to be the chief?
Well, it was tough. I mean, I had a tough couple of years. I had a couple of fire deaths, and you know, you do the car accidents and you do the bad stuff. But you know, the great operation here in Cody. It's a big volunteer operation. Probably the two biggest in the state. I think probably Riverton and Cody are. Gillette's still mostly volunteer, or a lot volunteer. But
it's one of the largest districts in the country.
Exactly. Area-wise, we are here, yeah. About 2,400 square miles. We go all the way up to South Fork Valley, North Fork Valley, to Yellowstone, Sunlight and Crandall, and halfway to Powell. Yeah, big operation.
Used to be a baseball coach.
I coached a little baseball. Yeah, we actually had
your team do?
Well, pretty good. I coached. I got involved in Babe Ruth. Then I headed up the Legion program here for a number of years when my son played. He was a good player, and we used to play a lot of Riverton. I had a good friend named Kenny Stoic, who was the manager down in Casper. You know, Casper Oilers were good, and we played a lot and got together a lot, and loved the kid stuff. I love baseball.
Seems to me the baseball interest is waning a little bit in this state.
Yeah, it is, and it's kind of a shame. Gosh, you know, everybody used to play Legion baseball in the summer. I mean, there's still a lot of it going on, but it's not like it used to be. It's just not quite like it used to be, and I miss that.
Off camera, you were telling me the challenges the area has with recruiting employees in the summer here and in tourist areas in Wyoming. How are things being dealt with? How are you accommodating the needs that you have Pahaska-Teepee in your family?
Well, my brother, who runs Pahaska-Teepee, it's been in the family since 1946. You know, he's had a number of Europeans. I know a hotel guy here in Cody that's a big operator here that brings workers in from Jamaica, and you know, has a dormitory for them. I know Jackson goes through the same thing. They just struggle over there for employees in Jackson, but we have restaurants here that just can't stay open as much as they'd like to because they can't get help, and it's a problem.
High school kids aren't working like they used to, or their interests are too varied, or what's the deal?
That's what I see. I don't know why. And you know, the college kids come home in the summer. I'm not saying they all don't work, but boy, it just seems to me like they don't work like they used to. Yeah.
You've had a couple tough re-election runs.
The last two have been, you know, the one 2 years ago wasn't quite so difficult, but the one 6 years ago was very difficult. And you know, I get really crossways when someone accuses me of doing stuff that I don't do, and they do it in an election cycle, and that bothers me a lot. And you know, I like to get up in the morning and look myself in the mirror and know that I'm a good guy, and I am a good guy, and I'm a good person. I'm honest, and then I'm true. And you know, things that got said about me six years ago in particular really bothered me. Really bothered me a lot.
We also have wondered out loud whether that environment or this environment makes younger people maybe not as interested in serving.
Could be. You know, one of the great presentations I've seen, and maybe you've seen it, is when my good friend Mike Sullivan, who's also on the board of the Buffalo Bill Center here, very active here, and Al Simpson did their presentations on civility. And you know, that really makes you think, because that's the way it used to be. You know, people, you know, Republicans crossed the aisle in a civil way and worked things out. And politics is not as civil as it used to be, and it needs to be.
Senator, if people could see the wonderful view out the window that's to your right, they would be looking right square at Heart Mountain.
Exactly.
You're involved in Heart Mountain.
I have been a big supporter of the Heart Mountain relocation project, and it's just been a wonderful thing for our community. The history there, just I marvel at. Of course, my good friend Al Simpson and his brother Pete used to go out there as Boy Scouts, but that's just been a great addition to, you know, what they've done here to memorialize the history of World War II in particular, with the Japanese and all that. What a wonderful job's been done out there. It's really a magnificent place, and very well done.
Be very encouraging to Wyomingites to go visit in their visitor center.
Absolutely.
It is. Well, Senator, you've always been very gracious to us, and it's always a pleasure to visit with you. I'm sure we'll visit more in the session, and probably about education. I don't know that issue is going away anytime soon in a variety of ways, but we appreciate your time.
Well, it's my distinct pleasure, and I've enjoyed my relationship with you, Craig. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Senator. And we continue now on Capitol Outlook with another weekly discussion with two freshman legislators, both women and both Democrats, Representative Andi Clifford and Representative Sara Burlingame. Welcome to Capitol Outlook.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
And I want to start right there. You are obviously both women. You are both Democrats, and there are a few of both in the Wyoming legislature. Has that caused hurdles for you as you begin your service? Representative Burlingame, let me start with you.
Sure. Folks have been so welcoming, but it does really help that we do have some veteran women, you know, women who've been in the legislature for a while, who have been kind of mentors to us and said, hey, here are some of the things that you need to know.
There's certain issues, social issues, where it is hard, particularly women issues. But since my experience of coming to the legislature, I don't look at people as a party. I look at them as a people and having an important conversation with issues that are important to our district. And it's that crucial conversations that's so important that ties us as just humans. And we're down here to do a job, to try to solve problems in the best interest of the people we represent back at our districts.
I want to ask each of you what those priorities were for you when you came to Cheyenne 5 weeks ago. And then I'll ask you whether those priorities now have changed. Representative, you first. What were your top priorities coming to the legislature?
You know, some of my top priorities were just figuring out, you know, the landscape and the lay of the land. I had a little bit of an advantage in that I had been down here, but really like figuring out how the process works from the inside, not from the outside. But past that, I mean, I'm House District 44. You know, we're the capital, we're the west edge, and we're the south side of Cheyenne. And my constituents, you know, when I was campaigning, were pretty clear that healthcare was a huge priority, education was a huge priority, and getting out of this boom and bust. You know, figuring out a way to diversify our economy. They, you know, wanted me to come down here and see what work we could get done on it.
Representative Clifford, you come from the Wind River Indian Reservation, and you represent both members of the Eastern Shoshone tribe and the Northern Arapaho tribe. Are your priorities different because of where you come from?
It is. I mean, it is. I did a bill, a controversial bill, the voter fraud prevention, and I voted for it. And I voted for it because of their tribal identification card that both tribes have struggled with as far as it being an acceptable form of ID. And that issue, I went with my gut, and it's something that was true, and I held close to my tribal values. That needs to be elevated, that are obstacles for both tribal members to use that ID, whether they're registering to vote, whether they're going to the stores to cash a per capita check. And so it's different. Sometimes holding true to my tribal values, I don't fit well into the DRR. I'm just tribal.
Senator Case told us last week that, and he spent a long time on the Select Committee of Tribal Relations for the Wyoming Legislature, that his perspective is that Wyoming gets it right in the way it deals with members of the Wind River Indian Reservation, and in fact is a leader in the country on the way it deals with its Native Americans. Do you agree with that?
On certain issues, I do, but some issues we have a long ways to go. We have a long ways to go.
Give me an idea of what those issues might be.
Gosh, I mean, besides the tribal ID issue, which is just simple, but it's so important to my tribal people, is an identification to be able to do a lot of things that the bordering towns or this whole state is required of my people to get a job, to get a passport, to go and register to vote. All those important things, those are very, very, very important. But what's important to me and what I hold true is healthcare, affordable healthcare. We have high diseases, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and health insurance is important to us, and we've always advocated for Medicaid expansion.
Representative Burlingame, you are Executive Director of Wyoming Equality, on sabbatical now.
On sabbatical.
I'll point out. And your group envisions a Wyoming where the dignity and humanity of all LGBTQ Wyomingites are celebrated and protected in the communities we call home.
That's right.
Has this been a tough session for you relative to the legislation that hasn't made its way to the floor or even been considered?
Yeah, House Bill 230 and its failure to be heard, and kind of the pressure that the state GOP brought to bear, really prioritizing killing that bill in the face of a lot of information that says if we want to get out of this boom and bust, if Wyoming wants to be known as a place that you can invest in, you can bring your business, you can bring your workers and their families, and they'll be safe and protected here, we need legislation like that. And the reality of the state party prioritizing its death was really disheartening. But actually, I kind of want to go back to what you were talking to Representative Clifford about, because it really cuts through a lot of issues, the fact that we don't have a dedicated tribal liaison. But we don't have that. And I actually had one of our colleagues approach me and say, oh, yes, we do. Sarah, you were mistaken. We do have a tribal liaison, just reach out to him. So I went to the State of Wyoming website, and it's not listed on the website. You can Google Tribal Liaison Wyoming. The only thing you come up with is the Tech Jobs Fair that my organization put on a year ago, where Cy Lee, who has a full-time job elsewhere, but holds this part-time position to just kind of keep that line open.
For one of the tribes, the Northern Arapaho tribe.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. That's right. So this idea that Wyoming is somehow the model, when you can't go to our website and see who our tribal liaison is, that's a poor model. And we need that information.
Let me ask you this question about some work that you have done. You spoke at Endow's Engage conference, which Endow is a group that's interested in Wyoming diversifying its economy. Engage is a subgroup of that, which targets Wyomingites ages 16 to 35. And you engaged them in a day of discussions with elected and civic leaders about the state's economic future. What are young Wyomingites telling you that is different from the old guard, so to speak?
radically different. First, like, it's not by degrees. It is a very different message coming up from the millennials. And I just want to say that that Endow Engage outfit did a tremendous job putting that together. We had, with one exception, we had representation, I think, from 22 counties at the Endow Engage. So they really were getting this cross section, with the exception that we didn't have anybody from Wind River. Again, there's this lack there. So Wyoming's not yet the model. But 22 counties, intensely diverse perspectives. You know, we had young families. We had, you know, college students who had just moved here a year or two ago. We had people who just represented a really beautiful array of young Wyomingites. And across the board, every single conversation I had, there was a sense of real deep frustration that the Wyoming that they knew that we could be was not coming to fruition, and that when they leave the state, that our state is known as the state that killed Mount Shepard, you know, the state that maybe not be friendly and welcoming and inviting to everyone. And there's this real, I think, dissonance, because we feel like we are. Like, we feel like Wyoming is a very welcoming place, but we've got to pass some laws that let people know that.
Representative Clifford, one thing that has struck me about your background is you got your associate's degree from Central Wyoming College in 1992. And then it was 11 years later when you got your bachelor's degree, and then you went on to get a master's degree in public administration. What was that gap a hard time for you was there a reason why you didn't continue your education right through?
Yeah, there was. It was a shock to get down to Laramie, but I don't want to focus on the cultural shock of it being welcoming and all the issues that Sara had talked about. I struggled with back then. But my grandmother got cancer, colon cancer, and it gave her 6 months to live. And I knew I could postpone that, and it was so important to spend that quality time with my grandmother, and I don't regret that at all. And then life happened. I got a divorce. I had one child, just worked and substitute taught, and everybody thought I was going to be a teacher. And I love teachers. I have two, an aunt and uncle who are awesome teachers, but I knew that wasn't for me. And so all my degrees are general. And so a divorce, another marriage, and had three more kids, and I finished through the University of Outreach because my grandparents always told me to go get that piece of paper and come back and help your people. And that was so ingrained in me. But I knew, and it was refreshing to know that I can help in so many ways. And I could find those strengths within me of where I could help the best. And I think my journey's been good. It's been awesome. Yeah, it's been really good.
It's been wonderful to see you both, and I'm sure that we'll get a chance to visit more as this session and subsequent sessions happen. So I want to thank you both for joining us on Capital Outlook.
Thanks so much for having us, Craig.
And as we continue on now with Capital Outlook, we'll visit with two of the more conservative members of the Wyoming legislature, Senator Bo Biteman and Representative Chuck Gray. That's next. And as we conclude our fifth week here in the Wyoming legislature, it's our pleasure to be joined by two of the more conservative members of the Wyoming legislature, Representative Chuck Gray and Senator Bo Biteman. Last year in the House, this year in the Senate.
Still getting used to the name Senator, so.
And I've messed that up in an email to you, and I apologize about that. But to both of you, welcome back.
Thank you.
I want to begin our discussion with a bill that was left in the drawer, so to speak, here this week. This is crossover week in the legislature. Passed out of Revenue Committee 5-4. And I'm talking about the Wyoming Budget Stabilization Act, which would have bent the state towards a cash-based budget. A primary sponsor. Representative Gray, what was the intent?
Well, the intent of that is that we have more than enough revenue in Wyoming to fund state government across a boom-bust cycle. We don't need to raise taxes. That's the wrong way for our state to go. The issue is we have sort of a disintermediation of collection points where we have these boom periods where we have a lot of mineral revenue coming into the state and these bust periods where it goes down. And so what we need to do is create a mechanism where we're saving more during those boom periods so that when we don't have as much mineral revenue, we have enough in cash savings to fund state government. So what that did is it put a cap on the growth, the year-to-year growth on fiscal year spending. And so there's a definition in the bill, and it put a cap on that at population growth, 3/4 population growth plus inflation. There are a couple other things in the bill in terms of moving towards a cash budget, putting caps on governor's requests in terms of budget requests on of the legislature.
With a growth factor built in.
Exactly. Exactly. And the idea is that we save more, sort of the kitchen table economics, we save more during the times we're bringing in a lot of revenue, so that, and it would have saved over $1 billion from 2002 to 2014. That's $1 billion that we could have used the last few years when we've had tough times.
And I grant you that number historically. Everyone you talk to says, including our profile today, our boom and bust will never be like they used to be. And how does that factor into your thinking, Representative Biteman? Our boom times, they're over with, is what most people project.
Well, that remains to be seen. But yeah, this framework that we're bringing forth requires a team effort. And I think the goal that Chuck and I had with these mirror bills is to get them passed. But if we didn't get them passed, to start the conversation and get everybody thinking along the lines of, okay, like Chuck said, we've got these boom periods. We've got to rein in the spending as a team, as a group. If we do a statutory cap at inflation plus population growth, that'll take care of it for us. And it's really important. And going to the cash budget, I think, is another great idea that's in this plan. We know how hard it is to predict commodity prices, and that's what basically our Craig report tries to do. They do a fantastic job with really skilled economists, but at the end of the day, the commodity prices are so wildly different from year to year. We just can't predict that. So trying to run a state budget off of predicting commodity prices is really tough. So going to that cash budget, if we can save up enough over these good periods with the statutory cap, I think it's great.
Another component of this bill would have been to require every agency every 5 years to do a zero-based budget, to essentially start from scratch. What feedback did you get relative to that idea?
Well, the zero-based budgeting provision, right now it's sort of on autopilot, where the last year's budget is sort of the baseline for the next biennial budget. The idea of zero-based budgeting is you start at zero, and then the agency has to justify every single expenditure. Now, for it to work, it really requires, as Bo was talking about earlier, a team-based effort. We need to all be on the same page, and I think, though, it would work, and we'd be able to look at component by component the spending within agencies, rather than sort of this autopilot situation we're on right now. And to kind of respond, earlier talking about the fact that maybe the booms aren't going to be as pronounced as in the past. Well, we've already seen a spending ramp up in this session. If we have that sort of team effort where we have a cap, we're on the same page about that, that's going to help us to control that expenditure.
He hit the nail on the head. When we had a good Craig report forecast, it's like we have amnesia and we forget about where we were 2 years ago, and all of a sudden the spending starts ratcheting.
You hear everyone exhaling. I mean, you really do, thinking that we've dodged it here. I want to move on just a little bit. Little irony, Senator Biteman, that you're on the Revenue Committee.
Yes.
How can this state, or how should this state, understand its revenue needs, in your view?
Well, I think I go back to my saying that I think we have more of a spending problem than a revenue problem. I really do. I think the revenues that we have are more than sufficient to fund our government. It's managing our spending, managing that growth of government, and prioritizing our spending wisely.
And let me ask you both, because you both agree that we have a spending problem.
Yeah.
Specifically where, though? That's the trouble that I see oftentimes when people say, hey, we spend too much. Well, where do we spend too much? I'm sure you have a litany of places, but I think our viewers deserve to hear where we spend too much money. Go ahead, Representative Gray.
I always start at the capital construction, especially state capital construction for state buildings.
These are large buildings that are built by the state of Wyoming.
Exactly. And there's school capital construction, a little bit of a different issue, and then you have state capital construction. And that bill is, in my view, always one of the worst spending bills of the session. And we're seeing that again in this session. And I think that's one of the things we really need to look at. And as I go across my district, going door to door, it's really a concern is how we're doing these buildings, and is it efficient? And that's the first thing. And then you go through 900 series, which is the contractual series, which grew a lot during the last boom period, where agencies go out and functions of the agency are done with contracts with other individuals, other entities. That grew a lot during this last boom, and it hasn't been ratcheted down enough. So, and you look at component by component, the growth during this last boom period, way above inflation, especially that first part from 2001 to 2007, really has not been looked at.
I still think what people want to understand is what services that they see day in and day out does the state spend too much money on? How will it impact them from a service perspective? Where might your constituents need to see less services if you're really concerned that we're spending too much?
I don't necessarily think the services are costing us a lot of money. I know Medicaid is a big driver of our budget, and that's a service, and that's something that we are required to spend money on. The services that we're not required to spend money on are the economic development type of activities we're getting engaged in, and we're finding ourselves getting more and more into other areas of government that we haven't been in or haven't been as much. And I think those are the areas that the public sees and my constituents see as wasteful spending, and maybe areas that those should be the first things on the chopping block when we start ratcheting back the spending, protecting the core services and the core functions of the government, but cutting back on the areas where maybe they're getting a little out of their realm, so to speak.
Talk about when Wyomingites should be able to register their party affiliations. Both of you have been vocal that Wyoming's current laws needs to change. I think many of our viewers think it's just a knee-jerk reaction to this last election. Yeah. I've heard you testify differently.
Yeah, we've had bills come up in the past previously on party switching. It's always been kind of an issue laying off in the backs of our minds for many years. As Republicans, and this year just kind of really brought it to the forefront with the enormous amount of money and time spent to influence or encourage people of non-Republicans to go vote in the Republican primary. So that's kind of the impetus. It had nothing to do with the outcome of this election. I think I even co-sponsored the bill 2 years ago that did it, when Representative Blackburn keeps bringing this bill.
Should Wyoming go to the caucus system?
I don't think so. I like having people being able to go and voice and vote. Going to a caucus system really closes it off.
What do you think,
to a lot of
Representative?
people?
I think the primary is a good way to go. We need to fix our statutes so that it is a true primary, and that's what we've been talking about in this session. But I think a primary is the way to go.
Let me ask you both this question. We have about a minute and 30 seconds left. We hear the term modernizing tax structure. What does that mean to you as a conservative, Representative Gray?
To me, that means that it's an increase in taxes, and I don't want that. And so there's a lot of different words thrown around, but when that's thrown around, that means that it's going to be a tax increase. And that's what we've been trying to work against over in the House side. Unfortunately, that corporate income tax did pass. And I think that's the bad move for our state.
Coming over to your body now, the National Retail Fairness Act.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
I have serious concerns about it. I don't think a corporate income tax in any manner belongs in Wyoming. We're a business-friendly state. We need to stay that way. And I think it needs to be thoroughly looked at and probably defeated.
Well, Representative Chuck Gray and Senator Bill Biteman, thank you very much for joining us on Capital Outlook again. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig.
And that's a wrap for the 5th week here of Capital Outlook from Cheyenne. We'll be back next week for week 6. Please join us then, and thanks for joining us tonight.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.